All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Xavier Duran. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for the Lyle Library District. Before we begin, a couple of things. We are in what's called webinar mode, which means only myself and our presenter have an active camera and microphone. So if you're still in the middle of eating dinner, or you just got into your PJs and are all snuggly, no need to worry. The only active cameras are the one that's on the presenter and myself, as well as our microphone. Because we are the only ones with an active camera and microphone, we won't be able to hear or see you. So if you have any questions during the program, please put that in the Q&A section down below, and I will go ahead and relay those questions to our presenter. A little bit about our presenter. Dr. James Flanagan has a strong belief in lifelong learning, which brought him to Triton College in River Grove, Illinois, where he authored and has been teaching the retirement planning curriculum since 2008. In 2007, Jim earned a master's degree in business administration from Dominican University's Brennan School of Business with a concentration in finance. In 2016, he earned a Master of Arts degree in gerontology from the University of Southern California, and in 2019, he received a doctorate in philosophy with a concentration in leadership and gerontology from Concordia University in Chicago. So please welcome Dr. James Flanagan.
Xavier, thank you for the kind words and the kind introduction. I like the idea of everybody being comfortable and kicking back and trying to figure out the age-old question of can I afford to retire? Kind of difficult to conceptualize all the things that go into this decision when you think about the world today. The stock market declining, so asset values are falling, and inflation is rearing its head for the first time aggressively in a long time. Doesn't seem to want to abate. So it should be a lively discussion tonight. As Xavier said, I've been working in the field of financial gerontology, finance and gerontology for close to 35 years. Helping people at or near retirement plan and build successful retirements. There are a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And there's the financial side of it, and then there's the softer side of it, or what really brought me to the world of gerontology, which was really trying to understand the biological, psychological, and social process of aging, and understanding that as it relates to money and finance. So we're uniquely positioned to help people at or near retirement face risks that other people really haven't dealt with in the past. So tonight, what I'm going to do is really take you through the first couple chapters of my book called Packing for Retirement. There are copies at the Lyle Library. I've had them there for a couple years since its publication. And really what I'm trying to ascertain when I ask the question, can you afford to retire, is what are the steps that I take to evaluate a couple or an individual's readiness for retirement? What are the questions that we ask? What are the markers that we're looking for? What are the things that you need to think about? And make it simple and straightforward so I can, truly get my arms around it. So that's really what we're going to do tonight. So let me get started here and walk you through the first thing I would say is that obviously we start off with the disclosure all the time regarding advice that we give, and we're not making any individual advice to any person. That's a thing that you need to discuss with your own personal advisors or attorney accountant before making any significant changes to a plan. So please keep that in mind. What I want to do is talk about what I've experienced in terms of what a retirement looks like for different people. And when you conceptualize retirement, for some people, it's, managing their finances, counting their money, really being involved in that element of their life. Typically that's men. It's not necessarily women. I don't find as much. Then there's people that like to do things that were always hobbies or interests to them. Somebody who will go and work in retail somewhere, will get involved in a family business, work with children in their business, or really take on the role or responsibility of assisting family in ways that people couldn't afford to or didn't have time to one generation or two generations ago. Because older adults, grandparents are far more involved today in child rearing and raising than they were in years past. So it's nice to see that change. So it looks different for everybody. What is common is really the themes that run throughout what I've noticed in successful retirements are people are healthy. They do have some financial wherewithal, and more than anything, they're happy. They have a positive attitude. The research and studies that have been done in the world of gerontology regarding attitudes about aging are deep. I mean, you can find a lot of research, and it's clear. Somebody that first and foremost has a positive attitude about aging, that doesn't think negatively of it, will age better. They will actually do better, and they will fare better in the grand scheme. They'll also live longer, studies show. People that have a negative aspect or negative opinion of aging don't do well and don't live as long. People that have this very gregarious attitude, the people that I know that are always opening the door for somebody, that say hello to everybody on the street, those people will live longer than all of us. Okay. And they do so because they're engaged at a level, obviously, that produces changes in their chemistry that actually make them live longer. So again, there's research on the outgoing gregarious people and longevity. So it's important that you have all three of these elements for a successful retirement. Without our health, what do we have? And obviously wealth is important, but it's not the end all be all, because people have different ideas of what a successful or a lifestyle sustaining income is. People live in different ways and have different expectations. So retirement as a concept is something really relatively new. It's a modern era type of concept. It's not until the late 1800s, 1850s, that we see in Germany the concept of retirement becomes popular. And then in the United States, after the Civil War, there were so many soldiers and people that had been soldiering for so long that they had no home to go home to, that they started to set up pensions and some sort of a retirement system so that people would actually leave positions and have some financial wherewithal. So this story of the Newmans here, and this isn't actually this family, but these look like some sad people. So I chose this picture. It's a story of some people that came to me. This is over 20 years ago at this point, but the gentleman was a maintenance worker in one of the local high schools, and he actually cleaned the superintendent's office and had done so for a long time. They were not unionized at the time. They are now, but they were not at the time. And what had happened was he came to me with his wife and said, I'm turning 65. I'm getting ready to retire. Just want to make sure everything's okay. Can you just look at where I stand? And when I started to ask basic questions about how much it cost them to live on a monthly basis, how much income they would have coming in, what they have saved, they had very few answers. They just kind of looked at each other. Sometimes one paid the bills, sometimes the other paid the bills. They rented an apartment. They didn't own real estate. And they never really saved any money, literally had only about $30,000. And this, like I said, goes back to about, I don't know, right around 2000, somewhere in there. And so I said, what made you think that you could retire? And he said, well, everybody gets this age and they retire. I just figured that would work for me the same way. And I said, well, it depends on how much money you have and how much what your expenses are, how much financial need you have really in the long run. Those are the things that will impact your ability to retire. And I said, do you still have the keys? He said, oh yeah, no, they were on his belt. So I knew. And so I said, I'd go back and get that letter. He had told me he'd left a resignation letter there, that he worked his last day. And I said, you can't afford to work your last day. You can't meet your expenses with the income that you have without your pay. Simply not enough money. And so I know that he ended up working until the day that he died, and his wife lived a number of years past his death, and she did so in subsidized housing. So retirement isn't a guarantee. There's people that run out of money in retirement, have to drastically change retirement. So it's really important that you get the entering retirement part right. Nobody has a workbook because we're virtual, and so it's difficult for me to administer this self-assessment. So we're going to kind of skip over this, but I'll tell you what it is. It basically is just a yes or a no. Do you have a written financial plan? Yes or no. Do you have a will? Yes or no. And it goes through different elements of one's financial life, so that we would look at, say, the legal foundations, wills, trust, powers of attorney, plans, written plans, retirement plans, estate plans. Then we'd look at retirement plans, investment programs, IRAs, 401ks. Have you established these types of accounts and done these things? And obviously we want yeses. And where we see no's, what we're doing is identifying areas where we might start our journey of what to do. So if anybody wants to email me, maybe Xavier can share my email address. It's jflanagan@bentron.com. That's BENTRON.com. And I will email you this self-assessment tomorrow, so you can take a look at it. I'm sorry we don't have it available tonight. So what have I noticed in terms of the changing retirement? It's kind of cycling different now with post-pandemic planning, okay? But more often what I see are people working longer, people sharing jobs or semi-retiring, cutting back to 3 days a week, working from home, all kinds of accommodative types of approaches that allow people to be engaged longer. The longer that we can stay engaged, the shorter the length of our retirement, the shorter the burn of fuel that we have to get back home, in terms of, will we have enough? So as long as we're able to work and we're thinking about having more longevity, I think the new retirement looks like a better version of work-life balance, where people in their 50s and 60s are taking more time to travel, slowing down a little bit because they plan on working longer. And maybe not in the same job, maybe not at the same level, but it's because retirement is lasting longer. When we look around and look at the older adults in our lives, look at the ages that people are living to, and then what would that look like in 20 years or 25 years when we get to a point where our cohort is dying? Will it be happening at 80, 81? Will it be 85, 90, 92? The extension of life is significant, what we've experienced. So I don't think that can be understated. End of life care is also more expensive. We're living longer, but the question is the extension of life meaningful? Is it time well spent if we're infirmed at age 94 and it just means very expensive care? That's another debate. But what we do know is that it is expensive. End of life is expensive. Healthcare is expensive, and we need to prepare for it. So here are the 10 critical questions that I ask people when I start to evaluate whether they're ready to retire or not. And so I'm going to jump right in with question number one, which is not a tongue-in-cheek question. It's really a serious question. It's, how long do you expect to be alive? You know, every family, every person has different expectations of their longevity. And I would submit to you that you have to be realistic. You can't, if you don't know, obviously we have to pick a much longer age. Okay. Now, when I say you don't know, I mean, all I can do is speak to different examples and people that I know and my own personal family experience. I can tell you that long living Flanagan males are not something you will find often. So 78 was like the oldest age of my father's cohort. So my brothers and I might be likely to live into our 80s, but we're not like 90s and hundreds guys. Sometimes people have died in the early 60s and 70s. So it's a different it's a different thought process that I have. If I work until 70 and I really think that with longevity, I might make it to 85 or 90 at the most, realistically. That's a 15 or a 20-year retirement. If I were to leave earlier, at 65, it could be a 20 or a 25-year retirement, depending on how you look at it. So what I'm trying to do is think about, in a finite way, how many years do we need this income for? Because income drives the retirement train. Without income, we can't live. Without income, you can't go places. Without income, there's uncertainty. And so you need reliable, predictable sources of income. And there aren't many. There's only pensions, which fewer people are have access to, have the benefit of. And then there's Social Security. And then there's, annuity income. Those are the only three guarantees. Everything else is going to be variable at the end of the day. It's going to be dependent on interest rates or market performance. So when you look at it again in a finite way, if I knew I needed an additional $35,000 a year for 15 years, or for 10 years, it'd be $350,000 for 15 and add another 175. That's at least a finite number of, well, if I didn't have at least 500,000, I probably shouldn't retire. Okay. In a very finite way. Now, that didn't include inflation, cost of living increases. And I tell people all the time, especially people that retire young, if you retire early, you have to expect that your expenses will double every 13 years to live the same lifestyle. That's the average that I've found through the work that I've done with hundreds of families. And it's about that time frame that you'll see the average lifestyle that cost 2,000 now cost 4,000. What cost 4,000 now cost 8. What cost 8 is 16. And that's just the reality of it. Different expenses get replaced. So we're not traveling in our 80s and 90s as much, but we have higher healthcare costs. We have higher expenses, because in order to remain independent, we have to become dependent on other people to help us. And that costs money. Landscapers, painters, handymen, contractors of all kinds, homemakers, house cleaners, people that provide homemaking services and meal preparation, and all those different things that we need as we just age naturally and want less and do less. So the expectation of how long will we be around is important. Now, statistically, I can tell you, if a couple comes to my office age 62, there's a 97% chance that one of them will be alive 30 years later. That's a joint life expectancy expectation that we would have. So when they come at me at 62, they might not retire at 62, but there's almost a certainty that I have to plan for a 30-year retirement. Now, when I started this work in the late 80s, 15-year retirements were the norm at the most. And now we're stretching it to 30 when people are saving less, have fewer resources in terms of income streams, and it costs more. So it's a conundrum. So we want to get down to how long do you expect to live from your family history, genetics, your lifestyle, your life experience, and be realistic. But then that gives you a finite number. So then you say, okay, well, I said my number was, let's just say it was 90. And I wanted to retire at 70. Like I said, that's a 20-year retirement. If I said, well, at 90 was a high-end expectation, but I think you've got to plan for that. But 85 is probably more realistic. That's really where you need to get in your mind. If you can outlive it all, that's okay, but you've got to start somewhere. And this is a place to start, because I think it makes the math a little bit easier. So I started touching on this before. How long can or will you work? I know everybody wants to quit. Very few people say, oh, I just love it, I want to keep going forever. People get the look in their eye in their late 50s, and they're pretty insistent on wanting out. And then if you can kind of make it into your early 60s, it subsides, and people will make it to 65, 67, 70. I think it's really important that you think about longevity, and you think about the peak earning years that you have are these years where you're at that peak part of your career, making the most, working the least. So why do people want to duck out when they're making the most in their career? That's truly the time when, you're not buying things, you have what you need, you can really feather the nest if you're insistent at that point upon, working and what the objective is. In the United States, people routinely, families, I've watched this, I say retirements are built in 10 years. We work our whole lives to get the house and the family life that we want in our early years, just to keep up. And then we educate our kids, and that takes a ton of resources, and we kind of fall behind in the retirement area. And then once those kids are done with school, people put money away, and that's really the time to kind of make up for that lost ground. So the fact that you could do that, or let's say that you can retire, but it would be nice if you could just supplement your income a couple thousand, 2,000, 1,000, 4,000 a month, depending on the type of work that you do. Can you do something from a consulting standpoint? Can you work part-time? Can you, whatever it is, to keep income coming in, and making sure that you're using that as the money that you use to do things that are maybe not planned, or to gift, or to do other things that you have dreams about. But again, all this is the simple math of, if I work until I'm 50 and live until I'm 90, I got 40 years I have to account for. So is it really realistic? The biggest issue with early retirement is healthcare, because if we leave work and we don't have access to healthcare until 65, when we're eligible for Medicare, the cost of healthcare can be very, very expensive. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. The next question is, what kind of a spender are you? Different people have different spending habits. Are you a shopper or not? Do you wait before making big decisions? The reason that I bring this up is because there's a theory in gerontology called continuity theory by Robert Ashley, and he asserted that people don't change. If you are an angry young man, you will be an angry old man, okay? And if you're a spender, you're a spender. You stay that through your life course. If you have high level tastes, you're going to maintain those tastes. You don't just change these things. So that's the continuity that we have through our lives. So if we understand from a standpoint of how our relationship is with money, I think it can help us understand that sometimes we need to put controls in place. I believed 30 years ago when I started my company that any problem could be solved if you like you threw money at it. You needed this, get a 3-hole punch, buy a new monitor, or you could solve the, and that's not the case at all. I learned very quickly that there's all kinds of things that we don't need, that people think they need, that don't add to the bottom line, they detract from it. This is the same in our financial life personally. You know, what is our relationship with money? Do we trust people with money? So it's something that you can work on if you know that you've got, an issue. If you're overly concerned about it, that's not healthy. If you're watching stuff all the time and really, if you're really that concerned, then I think you need to take some assertive action. Meaning, if you don't think you're going to have enough, then what are you going to do? If you're in any way able to do something about it, then you have to do something about it. Either get more income or change spending, but you can't become obsessive about it. So type of spender is important. Where will you live? Do you stay in your current house that's paid for? Hopefully the goal of all of our housing is to have it paid for, even if it's a second home. We don't want any expenses other than, property taxes and maintenance if we can avoid that. Do you downsize? Do you sell the primary residence and, temporarily buy something in another city and then plan years later to come back to wherever you want to be with family? I think the thing that I've learned about working with people and helping them through this process is to not expect that any decision you make is forever. We've all lived in a lot of different places and these things change. And as we age, they continue to change. So I think the first place that you have to start is with respect to your housing as it relates to aging. Because if your home is not conducive to growing older, if it's not a good place for you to be, too many stairs, laundry in the wrong place, no covered parking, all these different variables that make it difficult, especially in a climate like Chicago. I say winter kills. Winters are rough on people. People fall, people slip, people, get sick. All these things happen here that don't. I don't ever get a call from any clients in Arizona that say I slid off my porch and broke my wrist. I've had more clients break wrists falling in snow than, I can tell stories about it. So anyway, housing is a critical component of retirement. And I think sometimes people hang on to housing that they don't need out of, sentimental value. And I think the sooner that we realize that we'll make our home wherever we make it, it's important. I learned this from my own parents who kept a big old Victorian house, paid massive property taxes for years past. I was one of 7 kids. And I said, Dad, why do you keep the house? He's like, well, Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'm like, for what you pay in taxes, we could take the whole family on a Disney cruise every year. And it wouldn't touch what you pay. And so when they did finally move, we had just as good a time in their new house, which was a ranch and everything on one level, which was perfect because both of them my parents ended up in wheelchairs after my father had a stroke. So, they were forward thinking enough at least to get out of the, big Victorian house and into a ranch a couple blocks from my sister. And, it accommodated them until they passed. So, renting is an option. It's not, the worst thing in the world. When we do move into a senior living community or a long-term care community, that is in fact renting. In an environment when real estate values are falling, renting is the smart thing to do. So, we think about, we need to own, and that is important to own things. I want to own them, but at some point, if I need care, my home might not be the best place for me to receive that care. So again, I have to think about my life course, my trajectory. Where will I be? What does the future hold for me? Reasonably, because how many times do you want to do this? Don't make lateral moves with your housing. They trade your, one home for another home with the same but different problems. Still got gutters to clean, still got a roof to worry about, still got a furnace, still got all those things. It might be smaller, it might be less, but when my dad did buy the ranch, he had a really small lawn in the house that we grew up in because it was just in the middle of a block. And they ended up in this ranch on a corner in Des Plaines, and it had this massive lawn. And it was my brother and I and my kids that ended up cutting that lawn. I said, Dad, how are you going to cut this lawn? He's like, oh, because we had always cut the lawn. He didn't touch a lawnmower for years. And oh, he's like, I'm retired. I'll have time to do it. And then he ended up having this stroke, and I don't think he ever cut the lawn once. So housing is important. Where we live, how conducive it is to aging, again, cannot be understated. I touched on this just a minute ago. Should I pay off my mortgage? The answer is unequivocally yes. Few investments are going to be as good as paying off the mortgage from a peace of mind standpoint. When you own your home, you don't have any issues that can creep up on you. Like if you were to default, if someone were to place a lien against the house that you own, you still have to deal with a lien, but there's issues that you have in retirement when you're still making mortgage payments that people that don't have mortgages don't experience. And that's the fact that the average mortgage payment without property taxes and insurance, if you figured it was a couple thousand a month, between $1,000 and $2,000 a month for most people, say somebody that was older that had one for a while, be $1,000 to $1,500. Just the mortgage payment is it's the equivalency of a rent, but it's a rent that's not going away. I mean, the goal has to be to get the house paid off. At some point, if you can't pay the mortgage off, do you sell that house and downsize it to one that you could own outright and then have no payment and lower ongoing expenses? It's just been my experience that in retirement, people with mortgages do not fare as well as those without. Ownership of property can be converted to other property, can be converted to use for rental, can be converted to the fee that you use if you did need to go into long-term care or some other type of living arrangement. So again, I think it should be a goal. People should really work hard at it. When you think about the benefits, a lot of us are not benefiting from any interest deduction from the mortgage like we used to in years past, given the tax changes. So then you look at rate of return, and there's a calculation that you could do is your mortgage interest after tax less than or greater than what you would earn in an alternative investment. If your mortgage is 3% and you're, or 4%, and you can earn, 5% in the market, people would say, oh, well, don't pay off the mortgage. I'd say that look at your after-tax rate of return and look at the tax benefit and determine for you, is it in your best interest to pay off the mortgage? And a lot of times when people I've walked through this process are no longer saddled with that payment, it changes their whole outlook on their finances and their budget. It's a liberating thing. So I'm a firm believer in paying off the mortgage. So this is a critical question because it really helps inform what type of expenses you're going to have in retirement. What will you do in retirement? Will you travel? Will you work part-time? Look at the difference in terms of annual cost. Where somebody says, oh, I'm going to stick around. I'm still doing consulting work. I'm going to work part-time and hang out, right in town here. They're adding money to the coffer and not really spending anything versus the person that says, I'm starting my, European travels next year. That could be $20,000, $30,000 a year in travel expenses. And maybe they've budgeted for it, but that's what I'm saying is that it informs what your retirement costs are going to be. If you want to have multiple residences and you do want to, have a different type of retirement, even temporarily, where you say, hey, we lived in the Midwest our whole lives, but we're going to go, to the West Coast for a while, and then we're going to come back, or we're going to go up north, or whatever the path you take. As I said, it doesn't have to be permanent. It could be, but it doesn't mean that if you go and do that and you enjoyed that at some point you couldn't come back or rejoin with family. Oftentimes when people go on these different life journeys, just saying we got a place in Florida, they'll spend 10, 12 years in Florida, and then they'll either come home, changes in health, the death of one spouse, the fact that when they were there, all the friends that they had in their community have now started to move, die. They're not interested in it anymore, and they want to change. People want change. So I think, again, keeping an open mind, being flexible, being willing to accept some of the change that occurs naturally in our lives is gonna help us in retirement. But different retirements will require different expense expectations. So this is an area that I think is often under. It's a thing that's nebulous, meaning that healthcare and long-term care costs are something that we know are constantly changing. We know they're big, and we think that in a lot of respects that they're taken care of. And that's simply not the case, because Medicare pays for our healthcare costs, but a lot of costs that we need as we age are not covered by insurance. They're related to how we live. They're related to maintaining independence in our home, condominium, or apartment. They have to do with homemaking, with helping us eat, with transportation, with things that are normal, what we call activities of daily living, not healthcare related. They're not checking blood pressure. They're not medication management. They're not things that are considered covered by healthcare. And that confuses people because as we age, we just naturally become, and this is not normative, meaning that not everybody needs help. I've known, 95-year-olds that live alone, cook their own meals, and don't need any assistance at all. So it's not normative that you'll need it, but we do have also data that says that, yeah, as people age, at times they might need assistance. So we could plan to need assistance with some things. There's already things that I don't like to do that I like to do when I was younger that I don't like to do anymore, like cleaning gutters or something like that. So healthcare, though, is one of these things that, depending on the insurance you have, may require you to think about out-of-pocket costs. Anything in terms of drug, now that we have a limit on prescription drugs of $2,000 a year, that might give some people relief. But there's still a big issue with the cost of healthcare and the cost of long-term care, because this is where, since healthcare doesn't pay for long-term care, a Medicare supplement policy will only pay for roughly
Oh, Jim, you're cutting out.
we're on our own, meaning we bear the cost as individuals, 100% of the cost on our own. And that's what happens when people end up running out of money or having to spend all their money on nursing home care when they liquidate their assets and sell their house and do that. That's what's happening. So this is an important component to understanding, whether you can afford to retire or not. How is your health care? How is your health? What type of end of life? What things in your family do people die from? What does that look like? What do you have coverage for? Do you have critical care insurance? Have you bought long-term care insurance? Have you made any plans to deal with these risks? That informs, again, whether you can afford to retire. At what age do you take Social Security? All right, so we're kind of getting to the end of this conversation, and Social Security is a huge component. 50% of people that receive Social Security, that makes up 100% of their income. 75% of people that receive Social Security say that it makes up at least 50% of their income. And that's a huge number because these are not significant payments. Not what we think. When we think about Social Security, it was supposed to be part of a three-legged stool: a pension, a Social Security payment, and savings and investments. And so people that don't have a pension don't have that leg of the stool. And if we've been funding our savings for other things, then we don't have retirement savings or inadequate retirement savings, then people are heavily reliant on Social Security. So there used to be ways that you could increase the benefit that you get by doing having different strategies. And a lot of those have been eliminated in recent years. The latest one was about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's been some time, and it's really put us in a place where couples need to think really carefully about the goal at hand, which is to get the higher of the two payments. When we're receiving Social Security as a couple, any married couple, same-sex marriage, or any type of partnership, traditional marriage or otherwise, will receive two payments, right? When one spouse dies or one person dies, the greater of the two payments are what you keep. You lose the lower one. So the goal has to be to get to the higher payment for the higher earner, and that's the age 70 payment. So that's become the norm. But if that's the case and I'm in a two-earner household, then I might want to take the lower earner either very early or at full retirement age, 62, or the full retirement age for the individual based on year of birth. So it's significant if you wait. If you take Social Security early, you get a 25% reduction for taking it at 62 versus full retirement age 66. If you wait between 66 and 70, you get an 8% increase in your payment, or a 32% increase over that 4-year period. So a $2,000 a month payment at age 66 would be a $2,700 a month payment at age 70. And again, my thinking is, if I made it to 70 and I had the resources to get there, and now I'm guaranteed the highest payment of my life, then I get cost of living on that going forward. Then I've set myself up the best way possible. Even if I die, I've made sure that I had the financial security I needed to have enough money to live my lifestyle and to sustain the lifestyle that I lived. Whether I worked to do it, I used investments to do it, savings, or was drawing Social Security, it really doesn't matter. When death occurs, that's the end of whether you needed more or not. So, my thinking is, what about people that die prematurely, die in their 50s? Does anybody ever say, oh, wow, he paid in his Social Security until he in his whole life and never got any? No, very rarely do they. What we do is we look at it and say, wow, it's a good thing because there's a widow's benefit, there's a children's benefit. We get disabled, there's a disability benefit. But we have this thing in our minds about, like, if we don't take our retirement benefit as early as possible, that we might be leaving money on the table. And I just don't think that's the case. I think we have to approach it like, it's a wonderful life, and take from that building and loan what we need to take when we need to take it to meet our needs, and leave the rest there for our spouse, our children, our neighbor. I think that achieves the most good in the long run. So the next question is, do you have philanthropic goals? If you have a philanthropic bent, love to give to charity, or believe charity begins at home, where you're saying that I want to leave the family home to my children, I want this, I want that. We just have to carve that out in the plan. It has to be prepared for. People that have supported and loved charities, educational institutions, have been good at supporting them while they're alive, can find ways to do it at their death. It means less for family members. So sometimes you have to, either there's conversations that are had, or there's ways to replace that income that family would lose because you gave it to a university. So there's things like that, but that obviously that sets the bar higher. It makes the requirement for what you need to reach all of these goals greater. And so that's just a really personal thought or personal decision. So that leads us to our last question, which is, can I afford to retire? So what we do is we take the sum of all the questions that we've just kind of run through, and then we ask, is that going to help us understand exactly how much it's going to take to produce this lifestyle sustaining income? And the question is, if you want to know, then you kind of have to go through, this is how long I expect to live, this is how I'll spend, this is where I'll live, this is what I'm going to have in terms of what I think expect costs of healthcare would be, to come up with an idea of, can I really afford? And I think the thing that's most important, really, that I tell people over and over, it's income. Income. You have to have pools of resources that will produce income, that will sustain your need to increase income at different points in the future, or to support a change in lifestyle if costs were to really increase due to health. Or what happens to a lot of people is, when we lose one spouse, we lose a joint return from a tax standpoint, go to a single filer, and we lose a bunch of income. And sometimes people don't plan for that. So the answer to the sum of those questions is whether you can afford to retire or not. Are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions as we approach the end of our time? Well, hearing none, I will say thank you all very much for spending time with us here tonight. I appreciate your attention, and wish you the best with your planning in the future. Wait, we have one question. Contact info. Sure. I put my email address and our phone number in the Q&A there.
I'm
So
also going to send that to everyone. I just placed it in the chat, so if you want to take that, I'll also go ahead and send everyone an email with Jim's information. And if you want to continue on this conversation, you're more than welcome to do so.
great. Thank you, Xavier. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Oh, it looks like we have there's a question. Can you review again the timing of claiming Social Security for couples?
I would say that's a really personal question. It depends on the earnings of the couples, their disparity and difference in age for a couple. The goal is to get to the high earner payment at 70 for the high earner. But then in doing that, the variables are many regarding the spouse. Do they work? How much do they make? Are they a claiming age that's below full retirement age or early retirement age? It's a really difficult question to kind of ask in this forum or answer in this forum. There's just way too many variables. But the goal is to get the high earner to 70.
Oh, another one. If you're single, what advice changes from your discussion as a couple?
If you're single, then your one end game is to wait until 70. There is no, you gotta, because if you're single, you're gonna rely on that payment only. So if you had another, if you're single and you have access to a pension and have saved a ton of money, that would change. But then if you were single, saved a ton of money, had access to a pension, why would you take it early? Why would you wait till 70? So the end game is 70. It's become what Social Security wants us to do because people are living into their 90s.
Another one, do you expect Social Security to run out?
No, no. And one simple word, no. We have, we the people, meaning that the people over the age of 50 are the largest voting cohort in the United States. I don't think anyone's going to vote their benefits away. As long as the government has the power of the pen, they're going to send us our checks.
Any changes to recommendations for people with history of cancer?
Well, people with a history of cancer, I think that bears to say that, very bluntly, is your life expectancy change different because of that cancer diagnosis? People that beat cancer oftentimes have other conditions that contribute to different complexities in their medical condition. Sometimes cancer can come back. People that have proclivity for that might have to think about the fact that they couldn't get long-term care insurance. They probably couldn't buy additional life insurance. So, any early diagnosis changes the strategy completely, because in that case, that might be a person that doesn't have the life expectancy and therefore wouldn't take a late filing strategy, would take it early unless they're leaving a spouse. Then they would, they need to fight that desire to take it early because of health issues to try to get to the higher payment for a spouse.
Once again, Dr. James Flanagan, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time and your expertise. And thank you to everyone. Take care.